I do want to move to international stuff, which I know Kanthan is itching to talk about. I know, Koketso, you've got some ideas here too. You've been getting a lot of heat on social media about your point of view on some things, including the ICJ and Israel. And Phumi always has something to say about this too. But I do want to welcome our guest for the last 15 minutes of the show, Arthur Lenk, who was Israel's ambassador to South Africa from 2013 to 2017. Before that, he was Israel's ambassador to Azerbaijan and the director of the Department of International Law at their Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He is in Israel right now, and he joins us live this morning. Good morning, Arthur. How are you?
Hey, Gareth. Good to see you. How are you?
Good to see you too. So, Arthur, I'm very pleased to have you on. We haven't spoken to anyone in Israel during all of this since October the 7th. And I think probably a lot of South Africans are still asking questions about the ICJ, but now apparently we're also going to be suing the US and the UK for their aiding Israel in what they're calling a genocide. Let's have your comments right at the top on what's going on here. And I see you wearing a Bring Them Home shirt, which is about the hostages, which should still be released. That should be a priority for everyone. And maybe if they were released, it would end a lot of this bloodshed. What do you feel about all of that?
Yeah. Firstly, thank you for noting that. I guess I put it right in front of your face. It's day 104. Mm-hmm. Grandmothers, babies. The two photographs I have behind me are people that are connected to me personally. Keith Siegel is a grandfather who's married to a South African who was held hostage with him, and his wife, Aviva, was released after 50 some odd days. Keith is in his 60s. A grandfather and still in Gaza. Nama Levi is a 19-year-old girl who is a peacemaker. She went to a peace camp in the United States last summer with Israelis and Palestinians and my daughter, and she's being held, and it's unimaginable what it must be like to be a 19-year-old woman under Hamas after we know what they did to Israeli women on October 7th.
Do you want to talk about the current developments? This idea that we're suing South Africa, first of all, are involved. We probably wouldn't be paying as much attention. Sadly, I mean, it's a terrible situation that's going on in Gaza at the moment. It was a terrible situation that happened on October the 7th. But now we've put ourselves front and center here. Do you want to comment on South Africa's ICJ case and the current situation with the UK and US and us suing them for being party to helping Israel?
Yeah, I had a wonderful 4 years in South Africa, and I have friends all over your beautiful country. But your government has shown a cynicism that it's replaced this vision, this ideal of Rainbow Nation in the world to playing games with international affairs, how it behaves on Israel-Palestine, how it behaves on Russia-Ukraine. It's right. It's welcoming Sudan's al-Bashir to South Africa and then sneaking him out in the dead of night and getting reprimanded by the ICC, palling around with Venezuela and Cuba and Zimbabwe. That's not a rainbow nation. That's a rogue nation. And South Africans believe better, and South Africa should be doing better. And it's an insult to the word genocide, the way that South Africa has acted in this case.
Sure. Look, Arthur, let's park that stuff, because I think that you'll find around this table that there are people who agree with you and there are people who have another take on it. I'm really more interested in what is the sense that you're getting on the ground in Israel right now in terms of where this is going to be going. Netanyahu said a couple of days ago that he foresees that the ongoing conflict is going to continue at least through 2025. And meanwhile, we have a situation where Iran, which, for a long time has, clearly been the single biggest point of antagonism for Israel, now fired a missile to, well, actually, there were two missiles that were fired. They firstly took out a base out in Idlib in Syria, and they've also hit Balochistan out in Pakistan. Which shows
these are Israeli missiles.
Yes. No.
Did you say Iranian?
No, they're Iranian missiles.
Iranian missiles, yes. And my
what
point
they said is that one of their targets was actually a Mossad.
Well, whatever the point might be in terms of who they've taken out, what they've shown is that they have the capacity to fire missiles from Iran
Long range.
that can reach Israel and actually take out targets in Israel. And this, to my mind, fundamentally changes the dynamics of the way in which the Middle East has been managed for the past 50 years. Arthur, surely there has to be, at this stage, a rethink in terms of how to manage the fact that we've had these fundamental technological changes in warfare that now make it possible for a lot of Israel's enemies to be far more effective in terms of actually conducting a war against Israel. And in fact, if Iran suddenly decided to open up the taps in terms of missiles, given the size of Israel, how small it is, they'd be able to flatten Israel in a short period of time. So I'm sure that these are things that are being discussed within Israel right now. And I'm trying to get a sense of what on the ground people are seeing as the way forward. How
tell us,
how do we end up getting out of this, Arthur?
Well, here's a plan, and then let's call it the Cliff Central Plan for Peace. I'm giving it to you, Gareth. Here's how the war ends today. Free the hostages. Hamas give up control of Gaza. The war.
But they're not going to do that. They're not going to do that.
No, well, perhaps not. But you asked me of what's a way out. That's a way out today. Israel. There was a massive ceasefire in the whole region.
Since 2007. But look, my point is that that Hamas is not going to do that. So talking about it, it's like Zelensky saying that the way in which the war in Ukraine ends is Russia surrenders. That's not going to happen. So when we you remove the impossible situations, that's the environment in which you need to say, okay, based on the fact that that's not going to happen, how do we then rally all of the forces that can play a role in bringing an end to this conflict in a way that actually guarantees that Israel is able to continue to actually exist?
All right, let's hear what he has to say.
Okay, well, if my peace plan is unacceptable, sounded like a good plan.
No, it's acceptable. I believe in your peace plan, but it's not going to work. They're not going to do it.
Okay,
all right. So
but then saying that Israel should just stop fighting is nonsense.
No, I'm not saying
right?
that either.
No, he's not saying that.
I'm not saying that either. I'm saying give us what is the realistic way forward other than a war that
goes on and on.
That goes on and on, but more importantly, where you have an increasing number of enemies that are now more heavily armed and actually have the capacity. I mean, how do we prevent a nuclear conflagration as being the
what are people that saying about the end game here?
The end game has to be here. We're saying it like this: 150,000 Israelis are IDPs in Israel right now, right? Along our southern and northern borders, we've cleared out those communities. The only way for them to go back home is for them to feel safe. And the only way for them to feel safe is a reality where Palestinians or in the south and Lebanese in the north are our neighbors and not our enemies, are people that are not looking to destroy us. We have to be able to live in coexistence with our Palestinian and Lebanese neighbors as we do with our Egyptian and Jordanian neighbors. We have to create a reality like that. And when there's a risk, when there's a threat, when Hamas leaders say, when we get another shot, we're going to do it again. When Iran is delusioned to think that they have an ability to affect Israel and that Israel doesn't have a right to act like any other country in self-defense. Look, we want to live in peace with our neighbors. We've made peace with two of them. We've tried to make peace with the Palestinians. It didn't work. And we have to find a way back to it. Hamas is blocking Palestinians in Gaza and Lebanese in Lebanon by Hezbollah, connected to Iran, right? Also Hamas, of course, connected to Iran. The way back for all the people in the region is obviously you have to stand up to this lawlessness and protect your people.
Well, isn't it true that part of this has to be that Hamas have to be extirpated? They've shown themselves to be a violent terrorist organization that's lived up to every possible definition of that term. And they've given themselves no exit off this highway. So they have to be removed. They have to be removed by force, and that's what war is. And in war, there are going to be casualties because that's what happens during war. This war has less casualties, believe it or not, than any other one that preceded it. So we've just got to take this in the direction that it's going to go. And that means, inevitably, many more months of conflict, whether people like that or not.
Well, again, I don't believe it's inevitable. I think that there are options. Again, somebody, or our colleague Karen, just said that that's non-viable. I don't think it's non-viable. I think that countries like Qatar, countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Egypt have impact, have the ability to
all right,
show the Palestinians a better path for their future, a better future for Palestinians.
I wanted to get you on because we've got specific questions that you can answer being in Israel. So, Koketso, what do you want to throw in here?
Yeah, I'll just throw in this. One day, maybe we'll all be ready to have the conversation about Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic State, Al-Qaeda. You can throw Boko Haram in there as well. We need to have an honest conversation here. So personally, I don't like Hamas. From where I stand, Hamas, they had a great opportunity to really turn Palestine into a thriving nation. They're neighbors with Jordan, they're neighbors with Israel. This was an opportunity for them to really do something for their people. Instead, Hamas has devoted any and all resources to throwing rockets at Israel. That's how I interpret it. So right now, since you're in Israel, Arthur, I'd maybe ask you the question to say, perhaps the approach should be different. Has Israel maybe considered lending a helpful hand to Hamas to maybe build out a democracy or a thriving renaissance of the Palestinian people? Or is that also not impossible because it is completely against Hamas ideals? I'm in the other side of the world here. So from where I stand, I always consider the Palestinian people. But the Palestinian people, again, from where I stand, they're getting the short end of the stick here. They are surrounded by neighbors who are somewhat thriving, while at the same time, they see none of that prosperity because of the government they elected. And to this day, since Hamas came into power, you've never heard of Palestinian elections, I believe. So no. You could also make an argument that Hamas is not only a terrorist organization, but they're actually running a autocratic dictatorship of some sort. So can Israel maybe offer a helping hand?
I love the way Israel's always expected to be the adult in the room. There's all these expectations on Israel. They must. How about this from Israel? We never put any expectations whatsoever on Hamas. Like, how about stop fucking rocketing? Would that be too much to ask? But no, we don't even have a... you go ahead and answer this, Arthur. I'm sorry.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Some people have said that the difference between Israel and Hamas is because we've had these stages of wars and ups and downs and war and peace. And while I was in South Africa in 2014, there was a period of battle. The difference, I've heard said, is what happens between the wars. Israel built up a democratic, free, liberal, thriving society, that startup nation, and Hamas built a metro under homes, under hospitals, under schools, and all of the money that anybody's donated to Palestinians in Gaza over the years. Lots of South
and it's
Africans
substantial money.
It's billions and billions of dollars, and it's not been spent on their economy, on their education, on their healthcare. It's been all in preparation for war with Israel. And the challenge is, how do we find for the Palestinians leaders who have a different worldview, who see Singapore as a model and not Hamas? Again, I'm not arguing only for Israel. I'm here talking to you guys this morning saying, how do we make things better for Palestinians and make them a neighbor for us?
All right, can I go back to the international community here for a second, because we're running out of time, and we can carry on for another couple of minutes if you guys are okay with it. But what about the international community? I mean, we've got this array of states who've lined up in solidarity with Gaza and, frankly, with Hamas. There's no other way to put it. There was always this period after October the 7th where everybody was like, well, we support the Palestinians, but we don't support Hamas. That sort of dissolved. Now, those people are happy to say they support Hamas, which means that their intentions were not honest from the beginning and their alliances were not honest from the beginning. Let's admit that. But there are a lot of nations who are behind Gaza and Hamas and are anti-Israel since October the 7th and maybe a little bit after that because they needed some time to pretend that they were partisan, or rather non-partisan. Now we also have some nations who've lined up very solidly behind Israel. We've got Germany who've said they think this ICJ case is a disgrace. We've had the UK and the US. Where is Israel getting its support from? And where is Iran and that nexus of power getting their support from? Arthur, do you have any comments on the international situation?
Well, I think that anybody who's looking for a better future for Palestinians, who really is interested in the kinds of things that we were talking about of how do we change the story? How do we get past this? Can't be in favor of Hamas. You just can't. But the group of countries that want to, I don't know, break up this international idea of rule-based living, of international relations based on interacting peacefully. Well, the fact is Israel is the only country that falls into that category in our neighborhood. And while there's room for criticism for Israel, Israel's far from perfect. I'm pretty vocal with criticisms about Israel all the time on social media. That said, there's no criticism there's no rational criticism of standing up to Hamas, to rejecting. So earlier it was said that Hamas is like Boko Haram. It is. It's like ISIS. If we want more of those kinds of groupings, let Hamas win. The message that gets sent across Southern Africa and across our world is that's the way to go. But none of us want to live in a world like that.
Can I have
Go for
3
it,
minutes?
Yeah.
I'm very interested in what the mood is like in Israel at the moment, really in terms of their government, Netanyahu. They were before the war, before October 7th. There were lots of demonstrations, lots of anti-Netanyahu sentiment, and also a conflict of this nature is a drag on the population. Because they've got brothers, sisters, cousins, lovers, friends who have to go to the front. And also this long of a drag out. I know it's 104 days, you said. How do the people in Israel feel today about this conflict and about where it is going and how long it is probably going to last? How do they feel about that? And how do they feel about the ICJ submissions that we watched?
But Phumi, we keep arguing that facts are more important than feelings.
No. I've never argued that. But I do want to know what the people feel in Israel today.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I have to say, I was one of those people out in early 2023 waving Israeli flags, standing against the Israeli government, current government, again, and this question about how to stand on our legal system. But here's the amazing thing that happened on October 7th. Everybody stopped. Everybody understood that right now, the fight that we need to fight is for our homes and for
your very existence.
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Now, that doesn't mean that I or a lot of people would like to see Benjamin Netanyahu as our prime minister long term. There's going to have to be a domestic reckoning.
Arthur, the leader of the opposition, the biggest opposition party, and Benjamin Netanyahu's fiercest critic, Benny Gantz, is part of this government. They are part of the government.
That's right. Exactly right. That's exactly right. And he understands, and we all understand, that we have to win this war. That if we don't win this war, that there's no way to continue with Hamas waving its Islamic flag next to us. The Palestinians can't be our neighbors without winning this war. To answer your question about what's the feeling in Israel, there's an incredible determination, incredible focus on bringing our hostages home, getting them home, on getting our IDPs safe and taking care of them and their families. And getting Israel back to where we need to be. And then obviously we're going to have a reckoning domestically about what went wrong and who's responsible. And as far as I'm concerned, everybody's responsible, starting at the top.
So
But
just to be clear,
we're very, very focused on winning.
IDPs are internally displaced people, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Okay.
Everybody who lived along the Gaza border.
All right. I'm sorry, Arthur. I just want to go on to something else. And if you don't mind staying with us for a couple minutes more, I think there's an interesting new development, and that is the Houthis and their blocking and their aggression to commercial shipping, which has made the Red Sea impossible for some. That's interesting news for South Africa. It means they have to come past the Cape of Good Hope. But it's very bad news for international trade. And
Add
Biden,
10 days to that journey.
Right. It adds 10 days to the journey and many millions and millions of dollars. For international trade. It's going to be a major problem for many people across the world. It will increase the cost of living for many people across the world. Everybody in the room,
And the
Kanthan,
European
Koketso,
Union have actually said now that they're going to mount what did Paki say? Oh, an armada. So they're actually
Good.
looking at sending into
Good.
the
These guys, it's a small group of ragtag lunatics in Yemen who are holding the whole world hostage here. And they're using Israel as an excuse for doing this too. It's just piracy of a different kind. But they're also supported by the very people who want to
Iran.
destroy Israel.
Iran.
We can't help thinking that Iran is behind that too, right?
100%. There's no question that the Houthis are sponsored by Iran. It's no coincidence that the Iranian missiles towards Iraq match that up too. It's the question is what team are we on? Are we on the Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthi, Iran team? Or do we want international?
No, I don't think. I think part of the problem, Arthur, that we have here is that we keep talking about teams, and I think Donald Trump absolutely nailed it. When people asked him, what team are you on, and he said, "I just want people to stop dying." And I think that that's actually a good starting point to look at. How do we get to that point where everyone is able to have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness? And as soon as we have the team mentality, particularly given the way in which the US is a waning power, the Western world is a waning power, you're seeing the ascendancy of all of the BRICS countries. And there are these blocks being set up, and all of them, by and large, are not friendly towards Israel. And Israel has to end up living in a world where they have to live with those people. Israel cannot actually be an island. And I'm saying, how do you then persuade people who are on the other side and who are not directly involved in the conflict? So I'm talking in terms of the Russians, I'm talking in terms of the Chinese, and how do you get them on board to actually have some sort of role that ensures that Hamas is able to be controlled, or ideally Hamas should be eliminated, but one is not necessarily going to be able to get to that point unless there's widespread killing of civilians in Gaza, because you can't find who Hamas is because of the fact that they are a guerrilla war unit and they look like everyone else. And your ability to actually then take them out without having a large range of collateral damage of the populace is not going to happen. So how do we get to the point where we're having a change in conversation that we can actually say, let's craft out a way forward out here that is going to ensure that Israel doesn't get attacked going forward? Israel can't do this alone.
But I hear what you're saying. Firstly, I don't agree that the BRICS countries are ascending. I think that they're looking to be chaos agents and to cause the Russian word balagan, to cause instability all over. That's not a plan. That's not a way that international society, that people around the world want to live. I think that people who care about the Palestinians, people who care about Lebanese people, people who care about Yemenis, people who care about Iranians need to stand up against all of this. Those people, put the Israelis aside. All of those people deserve better lives and less chaos and less violence in their lives. If you care about Palestinians, you have to be against Hamas. You have to be.
Well, I always look at the situation and go, okay, if they got what they wanted, let's say that they eliminated the state of Israel, would that stop all of their problems? Would all their problems go away if Israel was just destroyed? And the obvious answer is no. So
No, I
if you granted them a wish in a parallel universe, and their wish was, let's eliminate the state of Israel, how would the average Palestinian's life improve after that? It wouldn't. On any scale, it just wouldn't. And there'd be new conflicts. I mean, we know that more Muslims have been killed in Kurdistan and in Pakistan and in Iraq and in Yemen than have been killed in this war against Palestine, which Israel's waging now. And nobody was protesting in the streets of London and New York for any of that. Let's just be very clear about it. People have absolute hypocrisy when they come up with this idea that Israel's suddenly the worst and the most destructive force in the Middle East. If anything, the opposite is true. Do you have any comments on the fact that that these Iranians are funding local politicians, Kanthan?
The interesting question for me on whether the Iranians are funding local politicians is, how does Iran get money into South Africa?
Cash.
Yes, but what sort of cash?
I don't know, but it's very, very possible. We know that this country is the most permeable country in the world when it comes to secure
and how
borders.
much money are we actually talking about?
Maybe enough to pay the rent at Lutuli House for an extra.
I think that
US dollars
Is
via
laughing.
Qatar in private planes.
Yeah, but let's
in the stuffed in sofas.
But let's consider the antagonism between Iran and Qatar to start off with. And one of the problems
Is there antagonism there?
There is. One of the problems that we've got is that there's no nuance whatsoever in terms of the way in which we break down all of the surrounding countries around Israel. So to the point, okay, I disagree with Arthur on one point. Iran does not support Hamas. Iran supports Hezbollah. Iran supports the Houthis. Iran puts a lot of money and resources into providing weaponry that's going across to them. We've seen comprehensive studies that have shown that a lot of the weaponry that has ended up in Hamas's hands was stuff that was sold to Ukraine, and then the Ukrainians then sold it on the black market, and it ended up in Hamas's hands. So this stuff out here is the Saudis hate Hamas. They want nothing to do with them. The reason why Israel has built this absolutely magnificent border wall is that they don't want either Islam or either Hamas or the Islamic Brotherhood getting people into their country and fomenting insurrection.
You
mean Egypt?
Yeah, sorry, into Egypt. Sorry, the Jordanians as well.
Yeah, they don't want Palestinians.
They don't want Palestinians out there. But what they are united in is that they all have this fundamental hatred for Israel. For whatever reason. Now
we know the reason.
But now going back to the time of Trump and the brokering of the Abraham Accords, and we were well on the path to Saudi Arabia finally recognizing Israel and establishing diplomatic relations.
And the UAE.
Yes, and right now I'm very convinced that one of the reasons why October 7th happened is to derail that entire process, because there was an inexorable push towards peace in the Middle East. So how do we get to the point where we're able to get that back on track? And who are the people right now who can be brokers? And I'm saying, Arthur, whatever you may say in terms of the motives of Russia, India, and China, the fact is that they currently have the ability to be brokers. And they've already shown this in terms of the fact that they've set up this rapprochement between the Saudis and the Iranians. Now, for the Saudis to continue talking to the Iranians, the Saudis very clearly are telling the Iranians, you've got to stop funding the Houthis. Remember that the Saudis and the Iranians met on the sidelines of the WEF over the past couple of days. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of stuff that's happening behind the scenes. And to my mind, there has to be discussions that are pushing people in that direction.
Well, I mean, Arthur, the Antony Blinken is hardly an honest broker in this situation. And we know that the Biden administration is half asleep most of the time. But do you think that maybe Kanthan has a point about Russia, India, and China becoming the middlemen, the moderators in a conversation about what could happen here?
Look, firstly, I liked earlier, he didn't like the idea of teams, but suddenly there's a team he's lobbying for. He's suggesting that should be more active. But that's not the grouping that has relations with Israel, with Europe, with the United States. In Israel, we very much appreciate the American government and its support for Israel, its desire to help the Palestinians reach a better day. I don't think that the Russians who are continuing to bombard Ukraine and hold their own opposition in prisons are the people to see common cause with. The Chinese have this huge economic crisis at home. If we care about Palestinians, if South Africa is interested in helping Palestinians and not just badger Israel and NATO and America and the West and team with the Venezuelans and Irans of the world, then it's easy to see that what the South African government is doing is problematic. Excuse me?
All right. No. Which side to be on? So Koketso and Phumi and Kanthan, last comments. Koketso, you go first. And then Arthur will let you wrap it up.
Yeah, so I tend to agree with Netanyahu here that this is unlikely to end anytime soon. And I remember, this is now years ago, someone on YouTube saying that there is a general consensus in Israel that Netanyahu is not the cleanest guy out there, but Israelis at the very least appreciate him for one thing, and that is that he will do his utmost best as a military man to protect the Israeli citizens. So it's at a time like this where they appreciate that. So again, while we have people like Benjamin Netanyahu as Prime Minister of Israel, you can expect there to be effectively no space given for the likes of Hamas to get their way in any form whatsoever. So this is going to continue. I bring it back to my key point here, is that when we are considering this conflict, we have to be very altruistic and actually say what our motives are. For me, it's the people. But for South Africa, or the South African government at the very least, they are intent on basically denouncing Israel at every opportunity. The Ramaphosa administration, at the very least, seems to want to position themselves as, let's call it, great diplomats or great negotiators of sort. Every president wants to leave their legacy behind. Basically, left his legacy, Zuma did.
In the sofa.
Well, the sofa is one of it, but the Ramaphosa regime, at the very least, they want to position themselves as peacekeepers, negotiators, diplomats, etc., etc. And that's why they're going the extra mile with this. The problem with that is when you are clearly partisan, or you've picked your side in trying to be an arbitrator at the very least, you have to at least be able to communicate that in an effective manner. They won't be able to do that with Russia, Ukraine, even though we can all see what's going on. They're clearly doing it with Hamas. So in the end, it's going to backfire, and it's taking us, the South African citizens, down with them. We are going to be known as people who sided with Hamas, irrespective of how this actually comes to an end. And that's not something I want to be associated with when we have a long list of problems back home that our government is seemingly turning a blind eye to.
Phums?
I think the one thing we don't talk enough about when it comes to not just this particular conflict, but almost all of the alignments around the world is the money and how much of a role it plays in the decisions that people, countries, governments, rebels make with regard to this. So when we spoke about the Houthis and the Red Sea Channel, the first thing that we spoke about was the cost of that blockade. When we talk about Iran and the role they play in this conflict, we talk about the support that they give to the various players. When we talk about the relationship between Israel and America, it's also about the financial backing and support that sits there. And Kanthan, you alluded to a conversation that has started and is gaining momentum here in South Africa, is about the financial benefit to the ANC of the role that they have decided to take in all of this. And I think if we pay a little bit more attention to those money flows, some of the unraveling, or actually the acceptance that this is going to take a very long time to come to any kind of resolution, then we'll be able to have less emotional conversations. I think if we're just saying the cost of human lives and the this and the this,
because everyone,
it's about
unless you're a psychopath, no one wants human lives lost. No one actively hopes for death on any front, but that's not how war works. And what you're saying is follow the money.
A friend of mine wanted me to say that today, but it really is about money. A
Okay.
lot of these things are about money, whether it's the Ukraine-Russia environment, the people are the human shield that is put in front of everybody, but actually it's about the money.
Final thoughts from you?
I said at the start of this conflict that Joe Biden is not a friend of Israel. I'm very clear about this. If Trump had still been in power, immediately at the point at which October 7th happened, Trump would have had boots on the ground. The U.S. Special Forces would have been going to go door to door throughout Gaza, and they would be dragging Hamas militants out onto the
You
streets.
may get your wish in a couple of months' time.
And in fact, what I'm saying is that so Joe Biden is not a friend of Israel. There's a growing Islamic demographic in the U.S. that votes Democratic, and they're increasingly controlling the narrative from the U.S. point of view. For me, it's very clear that the only way that Israel can continue to rely upon the United States is if Trump gets into power. And if he doesn't, I'm afraid, Israel is up shit creek without a paddle.
Arthur, you get the last word from Israel.
Yeah. Firstly, thanks everybody, and thanks for giving me time this morning. I appreciate it very much. And Joe Biden is a real friend of Israel, and we're very grateful in Israel for him. And our secret sauce of our relationship with the United States is bipartisanship, is that we're not dependent on Republicans or Democrats, but that's a whole different conversation. And one last thought, Gareth, for this morning is, even if you disagree with Israel, even if you have a beef with how we're behaving in this issue or that issue, leave my brothers and sisters in South Africa out of it. The Jews of South Africa are loyal, patriotic South African citizens, have been part of building your country for 180 years. This nonsense about cricket captains is scary to people.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. Yeah,
and so
that's just
and
terrific.
so they're your neighbors and they're your friends and they're your colleagues. And if you want to be mad at me and my neighbors, let's go at it. But the South African Jewish community needs to be treated respectfully and watched carefully in these dangerous times.
Okay. Yeah, looked after, more like it. But there we are. Thank you, Arthur. Nice to have you on and good to see you again. And hopefully we'll chat to you again soon. Koketso, it's great to have you on the show. And I hope we get to have you on. We've got lots to talk about election year this year, so you're going to be back in that seat soon. Kanthan, always a pleasure, always stirring the pot. And we didn't even get to some of the things that you wanted to talk about, but you'll be back. And Pums, as always, thank you.
Very busy show.
Very busy show this morning. We went on for 22 extra minutes. For those people who complain that they don't get their money's worth on the show, you got it this morning. All right, everybody. Cheers. We'll see you tomorrow, 6 a.m. bright and early. Bye-bye.